How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hello, everybody. We hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome back to another episode of Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask the titular question.
Each week on the show, we take a movie, old or new, criticized or praised, and look at it through a collection of criteria to determine our answer.
If you like Citizen Kane, that's fine because we're not here to hate on it. But when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, is there a film better than Citizen Kane?
This week, we're joined by Tina Lynae, writer and director of Sausage and Prenup, and friend of the show as we dive into her pick of the week, Paul Thomas Anderson's Boogie Nights from 1997.
Yay!
Yay! Tina, welcome to the show.
Welcome, Tina.
Thank you for having me. Do I need to intro myself, or I guess you already?
Yeah, I mean, you can, yeah.
I'll just repeat. I'm Tina Lynae. I'm a friend of the show, honored to be called that even. I've directed a couple silly little things, and I'm here to talk about one of my favorite movies. So.
And Tina's silly little things are very good. They're very well made.
Yeah, we love silly
get
little
out of
things.
here.
Yeah, they're great.
They're no
great.
Boogie Nights.
We'll see.
We'll see.
So, Tina, I'd love to know what your history is with this film. What was your first introduction to it? How did you find it?
I think I watched it I think it was my senior year of high school. It was one of my first, genuinely really good movies that I watched that got me really excited about film. The clearest thing I can remember is when it cuts to the end credits and ELO's song "Living Thing" comes on, and that just really did something to me. I love that song, and it really wrapped up the vibes of the film. I wrote I think 7-page paper about it in 2019 for extra credit. It was supposed to be a 1-page paper, but I just kept going because I could go on and on about this movie. It's fantastic. It's such a good cast, and I was looking for. This is branching out way past your question, but I was looking up clips from it yesterday just for fun. But I realized that there are so many moments in the film that are clippable or iconic.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
That I was almost for the entire length of the movie, I was searching for stuff and getting lost in the YouTube rabbit holes, but. Yeah, I think it's been one of my top 4 on Letterboxd for probably 3 or 4 years. I don't know. I also don't change it very much, but yeah, I just love this movie. Love Paul Thomas Anderson, and love the whole cast.
Very cool. I love that.
Yeah, so Parker, neither of us had seen this before.
Mm-mm.
We're obviously familiar with Paul Thomas Anderson's work to an extent,
Right.
but neither of us had seen this before. What's kind of your history with the film, Parker?
I mean, pretty minimal. Again, I've seen some of PTA's filmography, not all of it, but have enjoyed the stuff that I've seen. And this one was just one that it's one of those, we talk about this on the show a lot. It's not one that I was ever actively avoiding. I just never got to. It's on my watch list, and I'm like, I'll get to it sometime. I don't know. It'll pop up sometime. It'll be there, and it just never got around. But I'd heard a lot about this movie. I had heard a little bit about the way the cast talks about this movie, specifically Mark Wahlberg having some very strange comments about this movie in post hindsight. And that was kind of it. Oh, the only other thing I knew was that I knew the cast members, and I specifically knew that everybody talked about the Alfred Molina scene. Alfred Molina is great in this movie. And so that was really the only information I knew other than the basic premise of the movie and what it was about. What about you, Max?
Yeah, with Boogie Nights, it's interesting because I consistently, throughout my whole time of being aware of this movie, kept forgetting it was a Paul Thomas Anderson movie. Kept forgetting it was his second feature. And so that was a big surprise for me, even though I knew that. Going in right before I put it in, I was like, oh my god, yeah, this is okay, yeah. But my first introduction to Boogie Nights, I think, was there's an episode of Community, because in Community, Luis Guzman attended Greendale Community College. and he comes to like help them shoot a commercial at one point and has like a rousing speech to one of the characters and says he's like, you know, I was here in college and I got laid like crazy, and that was before Boogie Nights too. And I just like I just knew that Luis Guzman was in Boogie Nights, and that's like all I knew about the movie until I rented it from the library. I was like, okay, Luis Guzman is in this, and maybe it's directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, depending on the day, if I can remember that fact. That's really all I knew. I like saw some Letterboxd reviews right before I started it where they were like, I thought this was about disco, it's not, and I went, oh, okay. It's like, oh, so it's not. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's kind of like my only real like knowledge of it before kind of actually getting it started. And now I have seen the movie, and I watched a shit ton of Paul Thomas Anderson interviews from the period and also from last year, where he talks about Boogie Nights. So I have a lot of interesting research to pull up. So that'll come in later, I think. But okay, yeah, great. Parker, how does the show work? Where do we go from here?
Well, we usually go through a summary of the movie where we kind of talk through the basic plot points of what's happening. As we go through that, if there's any tidbits that came up in the research that are interesting or relevant to what we're talking about, we'll sprinkle those in. And also, the summary is just kind of a good place to just share things that are working for us about the movie, right? Like, we talk about a scene, one of us can say, oh, like, I really like these elements about it, or we can say, I don't know, this didn't really work for me. I was kind of rubbing up against this or whatever else. And then once we're done with the summary, then we'll shift over into our criteria of talking about how we rank it against Citizen Kane. And also, really quick, we should circle back around and just say, as our guest, Tina, I would love to know what your thoughts and feelings and experience with Citizen Kane are.
Yeah, I have definitely seen it. I'm excited to get into that in more detail.
So
Like right now, or
yeah, oh yeah.
Yep.
I thought you were doing an extended bit, because the last time we checked in, you were like, "Oh man, I got to watch Citizen Kane before the show," and part of me was like, "I really hope Tina doesn't get around to it."
I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah! All right!
Woo!
To be fair,
Yes.
how long is it? It's too long, probably.
I think it's like an hour and 40,
Oh, okay. Well,
Let's find out.
which is too long. Let's be
I've
honest.
seen a like a highlight reel.
Look, you went to film school. You've seen Citizen Kane by going to
Yeah.
film school, right?
I learned by osmosis.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've seen it by osmosis.
Yeah, I think it was my film history class, one of them. They did like a I don't know, it's like a montage almost of all the more technologically relevant points of
Sure.
it, or just, I don't know,
Mhm.
stuff that they felt the need to talk about. So I have a general understanding of
Yeah.
them. I know that I think the concept of like the deep focus was really cool and like very, pioneering.
Totally.
The opening shot with the window and they keep it in the same place, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Super
You've
cool.
seen this movie. Come on.
I know what Rosebud is, at least.
Yeah.
There, you got the beginning, you got the end. Done.
I'm kind
Honestly,
of.
that's all you need, really.
Yeah. I'm
My-
kind of.
I don't know.
Go
I'm
ahead.
happy to talk more about my knowledge of Orson Welles because that's a little bit more fleshed out. Still
Ooh.
not much.
Okay.
But my favorite work of his is the champagne commercial that he did,
Oh, yeah.
where he
Paul
was just
Masson.
hammered.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Just gorgeous. I think that's a fitting tribute for the French. And I think that they had to record it for insurance purposes to prove that he was like too incoherent to like finish the commercial or something. I don't know. But I think that's what I respect him for the most.
Yeah.
Second to that is his quote about Woody Allen, which I love.
Oh, it's a good quote.
It's just so searing and amazing. But he calls him like just incredibly arrogant but timid and like, I don't know. I mean,
That's
It's like the worst kind of person you can be is like arrogant but timid. He's full of himself. He's completely full of himself, but he pretends that he isn't. And that is the worst kind of person you can be.
Yeah, which is maybe one of the first recorded reads of a person.
Yeah.
I don't know. Which,
I mean,
of
Could
course,
be.
Orson Welles was revolutionary in multiple mediums. It was radio, it was film, and it was reading people. He was,
Yeah.
He was the first man to read someone for filth. Incredible.
Yeah, he was.
So that in itself is better than Citizen Kane. Yeah.
Groundbreaking, even.
Yeah. When Sight and Sound going to put all that we just said at the top of their best film of all time list? Well, wonderful. That's great. This is you've made history, Tina. This is fantastic. I love it. As the person who has seen Citizen Kane.
Naturally.
Yes.
Well, before we get into the summary, maybe I'll just give some background as to how Boogie Nights came together. Does that sound fun for everybody? Great.
Thrilling.
If the audience said no, I can't hear you.
It's your podcast.
So yeah, Paul Thomas Anderson, this is where the story starts, by the way. Paul Thomas Anderson was born in the San Fernando Valley, which is where 90% of film production happens on adult and porn films. So he was sort of surrounded by it in a peripheral way in his childhood. So growing up, he knew some members of the industry. In an interview, he talks about like how there was a warehouse near his house that didn't have any signage on it, and it was like, oh, that's where they shoot. And but
That's where they shoot, all right. Sorry.
That's where they shoot. Yeah. But basically he has this quote. He's like, they're good people. They're good old-fashioned human beings, which I think is like 100% the angle that he's coming at this story with. When he was 17, he made a 30-minute mockumentary short film called The Dirk Diggler Story. Its tone inspired by Spinal Tap. And its story inspired by the life of real-life porn actor John Holmes, among others, including a wider range of celebrities as a whole. But he always wanted to return to the idea. So throughout, so he went on to make his first feature, which we all know as Hard Night. That's how it was released. But the editing on that was really awful. Like, the company basically confiscated it from him and did their own edit on it. And so he thought that his first movie had been taken away from him by the company that funded it. So to cope, he started prepping to make Boogie Nights. And he was 25, 26 when he started working on this. And then when he made it, he was 26. Which is comparable to Orson Welles making Citizen Kane at 25. The film was
talk about it.
Parker
makes me sad. I don't
Parker
like to think
doesn't want to talk about it. Parker's over the Wells line.
Yeah, I'm over the Wells line, and it's bothering me.
I'm so sorry. Why do you do this show, Parker? It just makes you sad every week.
Max, I ask this every other week. Go on.
No, we're very happy here. The film was obviously seen as a huge risk for anyone wanting to get involved. Even after it was made and nominated for Best Ensemble at the SAG Awards, John C. Reilly still felt that they were seen as nasty and shunted off to a table at the side of the ceremony. Whether that's true, who knows? But the only reason that this movie got made was because he made this joke at a screening he did with John C. Reilly, I think either last year or 2022. And he said that the only reason it got made was because he convinced Mike DeLuca, who's an executive producer on this. He was like a head at New Line, who made this. And he said that Leonardo DiCaprio and Jack Nicholson were going to be in it. And that's how he convinced him to make the movie. Interesting thing is that obviously I feel like everyone kind of is aware that Leonardo DiCaprio was the first pick for Dirk Diggler in this movie. And he turned it down to do Titanic. And what's interesting is during the press circuit for this, in every interview, like the second question they ask, like the first question is usually like, so you've made this film and it's causing quite a stir in the media. And Paul W. Anderson's like, yeah, but I hope people come out and see it and see what it's really about. And then they go, but Mark Wahlberg wasn't your first choice, was he? And then he's like, no, and he has to like answer that question constantly in promoting this film, which I just think is really fascinating. But he had to do a lot of work to get people to trust him. And what really sealed the deal in production was when Julianne Moore signed on. And like Don Cheadle had worked with her before. And so he was like, okay, well, maybe I'll come do this. It started shooting in July of 96 and they shot until October. And then they edited from October 96 to October 97, finishing everything 1 week before it came out. So it was really close as far as getting the edit done. It was also interesting to me that on set he was known as PTA, which might be the first time that people were calling him that. Was early as on set of Boogie Nights. And then he had a funny line in an interview where he said, "Sort of ironic on this movie being known as PTA," which I thought was pretty funny. Um, yeah, and then just kind of had an interesting time getting this together. About 20 minutes came out in the editing process. There was a lot of like kind of commotion over how initially New Line was like, "This is NC-17, and you promised us an R-rated film," and so they were like, either it's 3 hours and it's NC-17, or you cut it down. And he cut it down. But he saw it as a challenge to make it more accessible. He didn't find the editing process too difficult in that way. He's very happy with how it turned out. He can't say what he would change. A few things he'd like to have done differently, but it's not like he didn't stick to his plan, is what he said. And there was this really interesting, again, these are some quotes from him about what the movie's about, which I think might come in handy when we tackle the criteria. He ultimately hopes that the public takes away that it's a very human story that hopefully has a little bit of dignity and is funny, and hopefully they won't be disappointed. He also said to pack a lunch because it's long, which I just think is really fantastic. He says it's about finding a family, to tell you the truth. It's about a lot of people searching for their dignity and trying to find any kind of love and affection they can get. And they find it in really fucked up and twisted ways, but they get it, you know? At one point, he did also mention like porno movies could be genre and should be genre. There's this really fascinating interview. Sorry, I'm just talking for so long, but there's this really fascinating interview where in 1998 he went on this like British, let's call it like film scene or something like that, and they just have him eating pizza, like he's just downing pizza slices during this entire interview, and they like ask him about Quentin Tarantino and like all these like Reservoir Dogs, which is like a huge part of the conversation at the time too. But at one point, he starts talking about how fascinating it is to watch a character have sex and how great of an insight that is into the character. And then his example is, he's like, imagine if we got to see like Forrest Gump and fuck, and we got to see how that baby at the end is made. It's like, can you imagine that? Like, how does that guy fuck? And I just think that's really an interesting point. But I just think it's fascinating that there was a time when Paul Thomas Anderson was actively trying to convince people that we should have all seen Forrest Gump fuck.
Forrest Hump.
I'm sure that film exists out there somewhere.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that's probably PTA's feeling too, is unfortunately. We'll get into that a little bit. When he was talking about how porn movies could be genre, he said that like, yeah, they used to be an art. They used to be film. He was like, and there was this interesting period where they were becoming genre films, which is what kind of this movie has too, with like the films that, Dirk and John C. Reilly kind of pitch Jack on. And then, he just was like, this is porno people trying to be real people. And I think that that's all kind of good to, I don't know. I feel like we could probably start the summary based on that.
Yeah.
But there you go.
Very nice. Well done, Max, as always. Tina, as the resident holder of the Boogie Nights keys, would love if you could walk us through this movie.
God, it's so rich. There's so much going on. I love the structure of it because it's kind of a 4-act thing, which is unusual, and I like that. It's very much about family. It's you want me to like summarize the plot, or
yeah, just summarize the plot. Just tell us what happens.
Yeah. Well, we meet what's his name? Eddie before
Eddie
Dirk?
Adams?
Eddie Adams.
Yeah.
He's got a bad home life, bad relationship with his mother, big dick, super big dick. That's like his thing.
Those are like the two things that are about him, I would say. Yeah.
Like if he had to do two truths and a lie, like those would be his truths, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, we meet all of the characters in kind of their natural, like less glamorous states, I guess. I mean, after the first tracking shot, which is really fun. We see Roller Girl in her high school class, and I don't know, it's a very vulnerable scene for me. Like, I don't know, it's very I don't know, it's kind of a sad contrast a little bit to like later on in like the 80s. But anyway, you kind of just see everyone's actual like context of their life, and then Roller Girl, pretty like the porn industry literally rolls up into Eddie's life. And you see like the skates on the side of the screen and he's in the background like loading the dishwasher and like it's just so I love the composition of that shot because it's so like I don't know, very, very PTA, very symbolic. Yeah, he gets into the porn industry, uh, has a really big ego and does a lot of coke. Uh, much like Paul Thomas Anderson while he was making it, I'm sure, which I'm sure is evident in the interviews that he did, because yeah,
Yeah.
those were his coke
Yeah.
years. But fuck, I should know this way, but I should have prepared this.
Oh, you're fine.
They do a lot of
That's totally
porn.
fine.
His ego gets a hold of him, and then when they switch to like the 80s, that's when things sort of move to the grittier, less glamorous side, where they all kind of suffer the consequences of mostly Dirk's ego. They, in their various ways, like uh, when they're the scene where it cuts between them, like Eddie's getting beat up, and then Roller Girl and Jack are beating up the guy who was disrespecting them in the back of the car when they were filming. Um, it's just such a rock bottom for everyone involved, and they're all kind of expressing their loss of dignity and their almost embarrassment of where they are.
Yeah.
Whereas Eddie's just getting like he's facing physical consequences for the point in life that he's, been brought to because of his ego and his drug use. But then, they patch up their relationship, they get over all their little problems, and then they're a big happy family again. And there's no real arc for anyone, which I love. I think I don't know, I love anything that really turns the standard rules of writing on their head. I mean, with the, 4-act structure and the lack of real character arcs is just, I don't know, for most of the characters. I mean, you could say that like, I don't know, Buck has kind of an arc where he achieves his dream through unconventional means. But yeah, I don't know if that was specific enough or too specific.
No, yeah. I think that's a great kind of general overview. I think we can kind of go in beat by beat of like scenes that that really worked for us. Yeah.
Yeah.
From there, I think that's a great like overview.
Absolutely.
So yeah, the four acts I would say are probably like we start like the first half of the 70s part of the movie. So like kind of Dirk's rise and then like his high point is kind of the second act. Is that what we would say?
His rise and then his climax, you mean?
Yeah, his rise and then his climax.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And then in the 80s, his fall. And then kind of that. Well, I love a title card that says long way down, parentheses, one more thing. I was like, oh, I'm so ready for one more thing. I love that. That's great. So yeah, within those, I mean, you mentioned like the rough relationship with the mother. Parker and I talked about this a little bit before the podcast. But that's a really interesting relationship. Like it definitely almost reads as Parker, I think you said like Oedipal, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it almost has like an edible turn to it when she like confronts him after he's comes home at like 6 a.m. She's like, where were you? Like, were you out with that slut? Like, is that what this was? And like, it's just berating him about this girl that he's seeing. And like, I'm not sure. I'd be very interested to know your thoughts, Tina, as somebody who's seen this movie multiple times and enjoys it so much. Like, there was a certain like pointedness and almost jealousy to their conversation that I thought was very odd and interesting. I don't know if you've ever read it that way.
Yeah, it's very intense. And I think especially because Eddie is very kind of childlike in that first part and kind of throughout the whole thing. He's not very mature.
No.
But especially in the beginning where he's, I don't know, like jumping on the bed with his like little girlfriend and stuff like that. Like, and then you have this really vicious, harsh argument and like he storms out and all that stuff. I think I read somewhere, Paul Thomas Anderson it was inspired by his own relationship with his mother, I think.
Oh,
or
interesting.
There's some connection there.
Okay.
Because I think either fuck, I think it was the actress, or maybe it was like Burt Reynolds or someone, while they were filming the scene was like talking to PTA about the relationship with the mother, and they said something like, you don't have to forgive her or something. And like that really, like he got really
Hmm.
quiet, and I don't know. It just,
Yeah.
I don't know. So I'd love to know more, I guess, about Paul Thomas Anderson's relationship with his mother.
Totally.
That would have shaped it. I know that there was some connection there.
Hmm.
And, I mean, he has that's not the first time that he's inspired stuff by his real life.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's
if
good.
that's enough to go off of.
Yeah.
Totally. Absolutely. Like I agree. Like it's an interesting scene, and like I really love something I love about PTA's filmography is just like the moments he chooses to include. Like again, this was 3 hours and he cut a bunch out. And in those 3 hours, he decided it's important that he's like, we need an insert of the dad listening from the other room and just sitting
Yeah.
silently on his bed while like muffled screams are coming from the other side. And I just like that quick little shot is, I just love it. Like there's just so much packed into that.
Yeah. I mean, speaking
And-
of, oh yeah, keep going.
No, that was it. That was it.
Oh, I was gonna say, speaking of like just like great shots at the top here, like Tina, you mentioned it, but like that opening tracking shot of like going into the club and seeing all of these characters, like I didn't even realize we were meeting the cast like at first. Like I was just like, oh, this is so fun, and I was, I mean, I noticed actors that I recognized, but I didn't know how big of parts they would play. And then we kind of go into seeing all of their lives, and I mean, yeah, I just feel like that like it's so fascinating that as far as like PTA's first like kind of major, like this is his, I mean, the first movie that he has like full control over basically in its final release, like from the first like frame is just immediately kind of knocking it out of the park with a strong sense of vision and direction.
Totally. The one thing about that opening scene, fully agreeing with all of your comments, but something that just kind of made me laugh a little bit is just you get to the end of that tracking shot and we land on Burt Reynolds and he spots Mark Wahlberg from across the club. And I don't know if he just has a sixth sense about these things. He doesn't know what Marky Mark's packing in his pants at this point. All he sees is probably the most like white bread looking guy I've ever seen. Like, I mean, I think he looks fine, but just his haircut and like the way he's holding himself, I there's no part of me that's like, why is he picking him out from the crowd? Why is he like, that guy? Obviously later it makes a lot more sense and like it kind of tracks, but that did make me laugh a little bit watching that. I was like, I don't know that I would ever stop to like track a Mark Wahlberg looking stranger in a club and be like, what's his story? Who is that?
It's magic, Parker. It's a movie.
Yeah, I get that. I'm not dinging the movie, Max.
No, I think that's fair, Parker. I appreciate that you wouldn't single out a 17-year-old in a club and go, he's probably got a big dick. I just think that that's good that you cleared your name of that.
Okay, pass the test.
But yeah, Eddie leaves home after kind of this big blowout with his mom. He's been working at that nightclub, and he goes and he just kind of gets welcomed into this magical world of porn filmmaking. And I think something that really hit for me with this was how much conversation there is around like how much meaning this has for Jack Horner and how he's like, this is like an art and I refuse to make these shitty little films. He's like, this is something that can be something so much more and so much bigger. And I was like, wow, like this guy's really got aspirations. And then when we go to like the first film that they're making, and it just hard cuts to like what it looks like, how they're acting, and it's just normal porn is like the funniest thing. Like it's the longest bit, like it's the longest build up to just like, hey, look at this. Like, I don't know, I thought that was really funny.
Yeah. And along those lines, something that I'll mention here that will come back later when we get more to the criteria stuff, like I had not realized how much of a comedy this was. Like I had not realized how like fully committed to being funny this movie is in so many ways. And obviously like it it's very much like a dramedy in certain aspects, but like I like the first, I don't know, the first 2/3 of the movie, like I was very surprised, like, wow, this is just funny. Like it is just a very funny comedic movie. And that kind of took me by surprise based off of other PTA movies I've seen where like he has a sense of humor, but you know, it feels different. And so I was pleasantly surprised by that because it's the same sort of thing of like, there's a lot of those moments where they set up such certain expectations and then make such a punchline out of the reality of what's actually happening. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Tina, do you have any favorite moments from kind of this first half of the movie? Like, does anything stand out to you as far as like moments that you really love or connect with?
I mean, when you talk about how funny it is, I'm thinking about when Eddie first meets John C. Reilly's character. I forgot his name. But he's like making him a drink. He's asking him if he works out and how much he benches, and like it's like, well, I bench a little bit more, and I don't know, he's just very I don't know. His ego is very big, but he's I don't know, it just charming in that John C. Reilly way.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the like it's just so well cast
Yeah.
that every interaction just goes so like it's so seamless, and all the characters are so I don't know, at least sympathetic in that way because the person playing them is like just giving it their all, I guess.
Yeah. Let's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I think I know any scene with Philip Seymour Hoffman is fantastic because his character is so I don't know, it's a small character, but very kind of tragic in a way. And I like that I don't know, it's like two sides of the same coin where he's just a funny, kind of strange guy in the beginning, and then it really gives him some more depth toward the 80s, but we can get into that. Yeah, I mean, any line that Eddie says is usually like just really funny the way he says it. This is not in the first half of the movie, but when he says like, "It's my big dick and I want to fuck," whatever, because he's like, super coked up and they won't let him shoot.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I feel like even though Leo DiCaprio was the first choice, I think Mark Wahlberg was such a perfect choice for this because he just has this inherent kind of loser quality to him.
Oh yeah.
I admire him, you know, I guess, but like there's just something, it's so believable that he would be this petulant, egotistical, like child.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, I think that I love like the loser quality that you mentioned. Like 100% that helps him out so much in this because initially I was like, I don't know if I can like just nowadays, I don't know if I can like buy Mark Wahlberg as like this young kid that I'm like rooting for. So the minute that he's like kind of like the ego starts really getting to him, I was like, okay. I was like, perfect. This is perfect for you. And also I think it's really interesting that like this early in his career, Mark Wahlberg made a film about a guy who starts out pretty like, you know, normal and then just gets this huge ego and starts saying really weird, crazy things, or like wild things, and kind of fails. And that's kind of his trajectory in his career as well, just in real life. Like I 100% believe that Dirk Diggler would say that if he had been there, 9/11 would have gone down a lot differently. Like that is 100% something that this character would say. And the fact that Mark Wahlberg has said that in real life, I'm just like, that's like poetic, you know, like that's wonderful in a way. I think that it's so believable that he's this character because in a way he did become a version of this character in certain aspects later.
You talking about like the specific line deliveries and reads, Tina, reminded me of one of my favorite moments from this kind of first half is when they're at the pool party and the colonel shows up and he's like, "Can I see it, please?" And so he sees it and he's just like stares where it is. And then Mark Wahlberg exit frame and the colonel just sits there staring for another like 3 seconds. And it is so funny. Just like the slight smile. He's like,
he looks at it for a long time and then he looks at him and he goes, "Thank you, Dirk."
Yep. It just sits there and he just stares so after funny.
Him. I forgot about that. That was fantastic. Tina, you talked a lot about the cast. I kind of want to just maybe run through the cast in this because it is stacked and also they're all really good. Like even the fact that just like Luis Guzman as like just kind of this most like peripheral character, but I feel like I understand him so much just from like the few lines that we get with him, and like him, him talking about how he wants to be in the porn industry. And that was another really funny bit where he was like, I just feel like if I'm laying with a bunch of ladies, I can send this to the like my family back home in Puerto Rico and like show them all that like, I'm this really hot guy. And then when he does get included, he's the bartender. Like
Yeah.
he does make it into one of them. And that kind of cracked me up. And like, and then yeah, like I love that you brought up like Philip Seymour Hoffman specifically because I forgot he was in this. And when he walked on, I kind of literally went, oh, like it's just so exciting to see a new performance from an actor that is so good and so missed. Like Parker and I kind of had that experience when we watched Love Actually for the first time in December, and just like even just seeing Alan Rickman again was like, oh wow, like in a performance I haven't seen him in. So seeing Philip Seymour Hoffman like this young and like this good is wild. And I think like I love what you were talking about of like I it feels like in lesser hands, even just from like script writing, but also performance, like this character could so easily have been like a joke side note of like, when he kisses Dirk, that could have really been like, oh, isn't that like like it could have been homophobic. It could have been like, he could have been made into like kind of someone to laugh at. But instead, he literally like you feel for him. He's like you feel so much for him being in this world. I don't know. Do we have any thoughts on like Parker? Is there anyone in the cast that you want to specifically speak to, or Philip Seymour Hoffman or whoever?
Um, this is going to sound mean, and I don't mean it this way, but like it's so nice to see Don Cheadle not doing Marvel. Like I like Don Cheadle a lot as an actor, and they never give him anything to do in the Marvel movies, and that's all I see him in now. And so I was like, yay, Don Cheadle! He gets to act, he gets to do his thing, and I think he's really good in this. I like him a lot, and like his whole subplot is very like engaging and one that you absolutely feel for. Like later on in the movie, when he goes to try and get a loan, and his past and his career comes back and prevents him from doing that. Like, it's just a very genuine, like, heartrending scene of just like, no, like I'm an artist, I'm an actor, like I'm trying to be a businessman, like you don't understand. And I think he does a really fantastic job with all of that. But that's probably like if I had to pick like one standout that hasn't been mentioned, because I also really love Philip Seymour Hoffman. I really like Don Cheadle in this.
Yeah, I think with Buck also, like that's a really funny gag is like how he's, people are like telling him like just dress like you, like dress how you want to. And then that cut to him, I think it's at the 79
New Year's party.
New Year's Eve, and like it just cuts to him sitting alone with like this big wig on and like just sitting there like
just looking the saddest a human being has ever looked.
But like consistently delivering on jokes and gags that are purely visual and like so brief, but also add up to something that means so much at the end, right? Like that, and then like that's when he meets his wife, like his future wife, and then, I mean, speaking of like the curb stomping that happens in, we're just gonna kind of jump around, like when those two, like when Roller Girl is actively like killing a man, basically, and Dirk is being completely kind of rock bottom, like hate crimed in a way. And then when they all drive away and then Don Cheadle and his wife pull into the donut shop, I was like, oh, this is really sweet. And then I quickly realized that I was very much on edge because we were lingering for a long time on him selecting donuts. And I went, what's going to happen?
Bad things are going to happen.
Did y'all think? I mean, Tina, I don't know. I mean, you saw this for the first time years ago, but like, I was really worried about him grabbing the money. I really thought that was going to end poorly, but I guess it kind of didn't.
Yeah, it's such a tense scene. It's like one of my favorites. It's another one of those like it's just there's so many amazing scenes to choose from when you're flipping this, but yeah, I didn't think more. I think more of my like anxiety, I guess, with the scene came from just the very beginning when he walks in, because he's wearing this crisp white suit. And at first you're like, he's, still on his journey trying to find his identity
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. But then by the end of the scene, the suit is just covered in red and
Yeah.
he's completely shaken up. And I don't know, I guess I saw the bag of money as he did, which was like the one silver lining of this, like that this is his escape. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't really. I mean, I get okay. Is this is after the Coke scene? I should know this. Is this
This is
Before.
this is right
Before
before it,
before? Like, okay,
right
yeah.
before.
because this
Yeah.
is the end of the 80 of the. I think this is the end of the 80s section.
Yeah.
Question mark, and then we have the one more thing.
Oh,
Mhm.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, like, I guess the tensions aren't at their peak at this point.
That's
So
true.
yeah. I guess it's if it had been after the Coke scene, then I would have probably been like, oh God, what's gonna happen?
Right.
But since that hadn't really been that bar hadn't been raised or lowered, or I don't know.
Yeah.
It was more just what the fuck just happened. And I don't know, the question was more like whether or not he would take it and not what would happen if he did.
Mm.
Sure.
Because it, that said something about his character and like he had been turned down for the loan and he, had to find his own way to make his dreams come true in a way that was maybe unsavory for someone from the outside perspective, as like they would have seen the porn industry as like an unsavory way to make a living or
Right.
something. But yeah, that
Yeah.
was just
No, I like that a lot.
Yeah, I guess like the reason I maybe wasn't expecting it to work out is because I really didn't expect this to have such kind of a patched up kind of like happy ending for everyone, of them all still being together, working together, living together.
Mhm.
I just for some reason my brain had not expected that, and that was a really kind of warm surprise. There's one thing I think we have to talk about, the Alfred Molina scene. I think we've set ourselves up to talk about that, and I definitely have a lot to say about that. But before we do, I do want to mention Julianne Moore in this,
Mhm.
as this mother figure within this kind of porn family of Jack is the father and her is like a mother of sorts. And I don't know, like that scene where she, specifically the scene with her and Roller Girl, where Roller Girl's like, "Are you my mom?" Like,
Mhm.
such like an interest. Like, I don't know, like what was your emotional reaction to that? Either of you, like, what, Parker? You hadn't seen this before.
Mhm.
What do you?
Yeah,
think Yeah.
I like it a lot, and I like it's such a complex and interesting dynamic across the group, right? Because she has, in so many of her words and actions and demeanor, is such like a motherly caregiving role, which then is complicated by the nature of all of these relationships, right? Like she pulls Dirk aside to wish him a happy new year, and they do coke and she starts making out with him. And she's like, "But you're my baby. Like I love you. Like I think of him as my child." And like that's such a confusing, should feel like a contradictory thing, but somehow they both exist here and they feel accurate and they feel believable and they feel true. And yeah, like that scene with Roller Girl, I also liked a lot, of just like, it almost feels like a thesis statement of all of the character dynamics, of just that question of, "Are you my mom?" is a question any of these characters could ask of any of them. Like, Dirk to Jack is, "Are you my dad?" Any of these can be, "Are you my dad? Are you my mom? Are you my family? Are we brothers?" Whatever, right? And I think that is just a very interesting thing to explore in this specific subject matter, right? Because I think if you had made this movie 20 or even 10 years before, I think there would have to be, just because of like the landscape of film at the time and the culture going on in America, there would have to be almost like a Hays Code level of cosmic comeuppance for these people, right? Like there would be some sort of nuclear family, white bread America version of values that would have to punish these people for what they do for a living, right? And we see them go through misery but none of it has to do with what they're doing for a living, right? Like they're not being punished because they're acting in porn. I think like it's just that the industry is changing and they have to go through all of this stuff and everybody hits rock bottom in a certain way. But I don't think the movie is ever moralizing about that, right? Whereas a lesser filmmaker or a filmmaker from a previous era, I think would very much make this a moralizing tragedy. That we'd see these people we like and we think are interesting, but it's like, but they're on the wrong path and they're going to be punished for it. And I like that this movie, like you said, patches everything up and gives them a happy ending and says, hey, look, they're people. They're human beings. They have lives. It's not just this 24/7, you know?
I think that's an interesting observation. I think there are some consequences from being in the like Julianne Moore, like not having custody. But I think the consequences are, or like the negative view of the industry, the movie tells it through the outside view of these characters. It's not judging the characters directly. It's more just demonstrating the way that they are judged.
Totally. Like the world they're living in can punish them for this, but the filmmaker isn't punishing them for this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the film doesn't judge, but the world that they're in does.
Totally.
Yeah.
But that's a good distinction, Tina. I appreciate that.
But calling back to the scene with Roller Girl, I think and back to what we talked about with Eddie and his mom, I think Jack and Amber are they're like surrogate parents for both, you know, Eddie and Roller Girl. And I think with the scene of Eddie's dad like listening to the argument through the wall, I think Jack is very much like the opposite. He's like a strong kind of father figure who also, well, he's present and he cares and he like really wants Eddie to like be successful and he wants to help him be successful. And, you know, Amber is kind of the opposite of his mom, where she's this very kind, warm, loving presence, still very confusing because it's, you know, a very strange dynamic, but she's just, they're everything that his real parents aren't. And I don't know, the scene with Roller Girl is so kind of heartbreaking, I think, because it's really just, it's like the thesis of the film. It's much about human connection and loneliness and needing that kind of, that guidance of a parent or some sort of mentor figure, even in an industry that they're in. I don't know. It's like kind of sweet almost, but also just kind of, it's just strange.
It's kind of bittersweet, but not bitter. It's kind of like strange sweet. I don't know.
Melancholic in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, with Julianne Moore like losing custody of her kids, then she's like putting her need to be a mother toward the only child figures she'll ever get to have, which are Eddie and Roller Girl, because she no longer, you know, gets to be the mother to her actual children, which is completely devastating to her. So that adds more of like the bittersweet part, I think. But I don't know.
Yeah, no, I like that. Along these same lines, as we're approaching kind of criteria and everything, there's a question I had for both of you, because there was something that I was catching on with this movie. And the more I'm sitting with it, I think it might have just been like, you know how it is. Like you watch a movie and sometimes like you're just in a strange headspace and things don't land exactly the way that maybe they would normally. But I would just love to pick your guys' brains a little bit about something that I found a little bit challenging for me personally, was that, like I was talking about earlier, I was surprised at how much of a comedy this was in a big way, right? Like we have a scene that might as well be out of, you know, another John C. Reilly movie of Walk Hard, where they're in the music studio and it's this extended sequence of them being terrible at making music. And we linger on that for a while, and it's played seriously, you know what I mean? In the sense that like they fully buy into their own bullshit, but we as the audience are laughing and having a great time with it, right?
Well, I feel like that's almost a remnant of the mockumentary that this was a short film that he made, right? Like
that's a good point.
Feels very Spinal Tap.
Yeah, it's got that energy to it. Spinal Tap's a great comparison of like the
it's
tone that it's playing, right?
yeah, and that's like the inspiration for him.
Totally. And so because of that, like that tone in those moments, and there's a lot of them in that first half of the movie, because of that, the really harsh switch into the 80s and that whole like Dark Night of the Soul sequence with the limo and Dirk in the parking lot and all of that, like it was, and it's such a weird hyper specific thing, but like the soundtrack of like the bell tolling underneath all of this, like it felt like a big emotional reversal and whiplash for me personally. And I'd be curious to know, like, if any of you have had that experience watching the movie, Max, with your first time, or Tina in the past, of like, that was just such a harsh 180 for me that I rubbed up against it a little bit. It was like, wow, we were just in Spinal Tap mockumentary mode, and now we're here, and it's really heavy and it's really intense, and like finding a way to like get into that as an audience member. I'd just be curious to know both of your thoughts about that, because again, I think it's just a me problem, but I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, I mean, I could go. I think for me, I see where you're coming from, Barker. Absolutely. I think for me, the framing of the film makes it work for me. Of this is such like Dirk's career is so unreal that like it makes sense that the highs would be unbelievably weirdly high, of like, I mean literally high in some cases, but like, being at this award show and winning, like cleaning out, like, sweeping the porn awards, and like all of these really high points for him and these climaxes, if you will. And then kind of, yeah, I know I stole Tina's joke from earlier. I repeated it. It wasn't even a good version of it. And then it makes sense that like the higher that is, the lower the lows are. And I think for me, like there's enough of a descent into it for me, especially with Dirk's story of like before that point, we see him fighting with Robert Downey Sr. in that in like the recording studio, trying to get the recordings, the records from him. I feel like we see enough of that fall before for that part to work. And same with Jack. When we were talking about rock bottom for each of the characters, initially my brain went, oh, well, Jack doesn't reach a rock bottom. And I go, yes, he does, because he sees his industry die. He sees this art form die, which is a stance that PTA himself has of like, he can't, he's so like bummed that like porn with the invention of video, the advent of video, that like ruined it as an art form. But I think that's Jack's low point too. Like he sees this as well, so he's like, I'm gonna try video. Like I don't know. I feel like I see enough of the paths to these points that I don't get as much of like whiplash for it. Sure. But I don't blame you for for feeling that. Like I think that's hard, But I think for me, I felt enough of a pull towards those directions, that I kind of got that like bittersweet sense.
Yeah, I can get that.
Yeah.
I love the parallel between the shot of them in the back of the car filming, and then in the beginning when it's the shot of them filming the porn on film in the 70s. It's such like, because it's kind of the same setup. I think it's the same camera guy and everything, but it's just such a contrast in, I don't know, the lighting is warmer in the first part, and it's more like it's a movie set, and then they're just cramped into the back of this like limo, and it's really dark, and kind of the color grading is a lot colder, and I don't know, I've always liked that parallel. But as for the tonal switch, I think it works for me, because at the New Year's party, that's really like, that's when the switch flips, when
Sure.
William H. Macy, does the murder suicide. Because up until then, it's like that was kind of, he was the butt of that joke. His wife kept sleeping with people in front of him, and he was just like this cuck, basically, that had to like take it, until we really get dragged into reality that like, no, he couldn't take it, and he didn't. And that is like, that's when things really stopped being fun. And it was kind of like the first part was the high, and then this was the come down.
Totally.
They were really like, they were having an amazing, few years of success, and then just like that, it switches and everyone is in a much, I don't know, more I don't know, morose situation.
Right. Yeah, and like to both of your points, I totally felt that shift at the New Year's, 100%. And I think that's why I got thrown off by the music scene in the 80s, because it's like, we just had this happen and that feels like it should be a Parasite level 180 switch in tone completely. And it sort of commits to that. And then sprinkled throughout, you still have those kind of sillier moments in the midst of all of that. And so I was just, but I totally see what you guys are saying. And I think that like, the switch in tone matching up with the switch in timeline and the switch in industry, I think is a framing device that carries a lot of that for me. And like that rubbing up point is like a half-star knock for me. It's so minor, but I was mostly just curious to kind of hear your thoughts on all of that as well. And yeah, good thoughts.
I think it's a good point of discussion. Something came to mind for me, you know, earlier I was kind of mentioning like how it feels like a lot of these characters are built out of small bits that build to a bigger picture that is like morose and also funny and sad and bittersweet in that weird, strange way. And I feel like that's kind of the entire movie. Like,
yeah,
all of these things are just like, they can still be funny and then they can still be absolutely devastating at the same time. I don't know. I think that's really interesting. And I think, and especially like it can feel dangerous and still be funny at the same time. And I think that's like most expertly pointed out with the Alfred Molina scene, which I think we need to talk about, because Tina, you texted me before I watched this movie and said the Alfred Molina scene alone is better than all of Citizen Kane. And I was like, okay. And I spent a lot of the movie being like, when's this Alfred Molina scene gonna happen? Like, I was like, is he gonna show up? Did I miss him? Did he look so different in 1997 that I didn't recognize him? And then they start talking about a Rahad Jackson in the One More Thing, and they get going, and I was like, okay, I think this is it. And it was. And as someone who has seen all of Citizen Kane, you know, not just by osmosis, and I mean, not to discount your viewing of it, I still think it 100% counts. I think the scene's really great. I think it easily does. I think it's fascinating that in a cast full of absolutely knockout performances by actors who are so good and crushing it the whole movie, that Alfred Molina can show up for like 10 or 11 minutes and just kind of steal the whole thing is wild. And I don't think he fully does. I don't think that's completely fair to everyone that we've talked about before this, but he comes really close if he doesn't.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, I mean,
I was.
I'm sorry. No, that's one of the scenes that is still talked about. Out of all of them, like that is, I would say, not the scene, because probably the very end when he shows, you know, that's probably the scene. But God, yeah, he's only in there for like 10 minutes. But yeah, anyway, sorry. Go ahead, Parker.
Oh no, just like he's just incredible. Like it was just such like, not only is the scene so manic and so well put together, of just like it feels like a descent into hell. It feels like we've gone and all logic is out the window, where we're just blasting 80s music and this dude is lighting off firecrackers that sound like gunshots and everybody is flinching and on edge, and just Todd is gone. He is so completely in his own world, and like the scene is working so well, and in the midst of that, you've got, you know, if you're still running with that descent into hell metaphor, you've got Alfred Molina as like the most charming, affable, quirky Lucifer you've ever seen in your life. Yeah. We're just like, let's hang out, man. It's just a good time. And kind of like you were talking about earlier, Max, with like Buck finding the money and like being worried about like what's going to happen with that. It sets up this expectation of like, they're going to check the coke. They're going to check it. He's like, he's sorting through it. He's weighing it. But that isn't the issue. The issue is that Todd is off his rocker and blows their cover completely. And I love that reversal of like building tension one direction to have it completely reversed, because none of that matters anymore. Like it's an, how do I describe it? Like it's an emotional MacGuffin. You know what I mean? Like you think that tension is the important thing, but it's actually something completely different that you should have been paying attention to. And it's a really good scene.
Yeah.
it like I don't know, especially the close up when Eddie's just sitting on the couch and the music is playing and then he's not really hearing what anyone else is saying and it really stays on him for like a long time.
Yeah.
It it just captures the feeling of like having a really intense but bad high at like
Mm.
and like being stuck at your dealer's house or something and like you really want to leave but like you don't want to be impolite or like usually it's not a life or death situation but um it's so tense and the firecrackers in the background just keep building up to like the actual gun because you know that there's going to be
Totally.
some kind of gunfight
Yeah.
or something because I mean but you just don't know when you don't know who's going to start
Yeah.
shooting you don't know why and then when it starts it's just so like you said it's so unexpected because you think that it's going to be about the fake coke that they're going to like that's going to be the main issue but it's really because Todd's an idiot and he's like I don't know I love that he starts saying like yeah we want something else like really quietly to himself like he's really trying to work up the courage to say it and I still I don't even fully understand like the thinking there if there was thinking but God what a good
Yeah.
what a good soundtrack I love when
Yeah.
the mixtape stops and there's just that slight little break and then we go into Jesse's girl and then that's when shit gets real and
Yeah.
it's just such a good scene.
Yeah. I do want to talk about the scene. I did have some interesting points about this. One is that in the screening they did recently, John C. Reilly talks about how initially the plan was to have the police show up and like just completely blow up the house basically. And so that entire set was like the walls were lined with squibs. And so there was this sensation for the actors of like, is this whole place gonna blow at any time? Like there was like this kind of this question initially, and then that was kind of changed. At least that's what he said. I mean, that's what he said happened.
Sure.
But like PTA was right there and he didn't correct him. So I'm like, all right. But it did take 4 or 5 days to shoot, which is a long time to get, one kind of scene. But PTA also made the joke, I think it was a joke, of that shot of Dirk looking like out for a really long time was just the result of Mark Wahlberg having shot for 5 days doing this scene with these firecrackers that like John C. Reilly's like, I still have PTSD from that. The firecrackers, here's the fun thing about the firecrackers. They're a reference to a Robert Downey Sr. film, who is one of PTA's idols apparently in the 90s. And it's a reference to one of his films from the 60s. And so yeah, so there's that reference of like it's a reference for that. And I also like that Robert Downey Sr. does show up in this. Like that's nice that he got him because he called him up and was like, hey, do you have any like advice on firecrackers, like this sort of thing? And then also PTA's dad was in early TV in Cleveland in the mid 60s and was a horror talk show host who would introduce bad horror films. And he was one of the first guys to chrome key himself into the movie and constantly, and like his bit was that he would blow stuff up with firecrackers in the movie. And so PTA made the comment of like, yeah, like father figures with firecrackers. I don't know. And I was like, okay, very interesting. Like, I don't know. I think that's an interesting little bit about that scene, but it's unbelievable. It's such an achievement and just kind of has that, it has that kind of there will be blood ending, like descent into hell vibe that I just really love. So, yeah, good scene.
Good scene. I think that covers most of our bases. Is there any other like moments or scenes or lines that any of you want to discuss or call out before we move into criteria?
Let me check my notes really quick. Sorry. I just want to give a really quick shout out to the names in this movie because I just love the poor names, especially Chest Rockwell. I think it's such a fantastic
name. Great one.
Backlanders. I just want to give it just a few seconds of props for that.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
I think Ron Jeremy was a consultant on this, and they used a lot of like actual porn dialogue from the 70s.
Oh,
which the scene when they're I forgot her name, but she's like at the bar and she's asking about like, oh, what's good here, and he's like, oh wait, no, it's not just good, it's incredible. Like that's the word for word from a scene from the porn star that this was kind of based off of, actually.
Oh wow.
Very interesting.
Like, it's almost shot for shot, like the way that it's spot on.
Yeah, wow. Yeah,
And
I
that
mean,
was all I had.
oh yeah,
Very
no, I
cool.
mean, I think I don't have much else. I do think it's pretty funny that when Buck comes out of his final business at the end, he's once again dressed in a completely different aesthetic. Like he still never has
Yeah.
like just owned up who he is. He's just constantly trying new things, and also got a real big kind of uncomfortable laugh about them filming the birth of Buck's child. And just like the use of like these cameras and like a porn filmmaker to shoot like the exact opposite of this. Like I thought that was really like a funny little inclusion right at the end. And also Burt Reynolds is really good in this.
really
And
good
he
in
especially really sells that scene in the limo. I think he's doing unreal levels of like being uncomfortable with it, trying really hard to be camera presentable. And like, I don't know. I just think he's great in so many other scenes in that, but like, especially in that limo scene, I thought he was really good.
And he
Totally.
hated the movie after it came out. Like he was not happy to be associated with it afterwards. Even
Oh,
though he won
interesting.
an Oscar for it. I don't know if he ever came around to it, but like
I think later he did have a quote where he was like, it's well made or something like that. But I know that he and PTA didn't get along super well, I don't think, on set.
Mm.
And he wasn't super happy with it for a while. Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah.
I think the only other thing that I wanted to mention, just because I like it a lot, there's a lot of parallels in this movie, and you were talking about that, Tina, like parallel framing, parallel dialogue. And something that I really, really love is the scene where they're doing Dirk's first porn movie, and the cinematographer is like, hey, you got shadows over there. And he's like, well, there's shadows in life, man. He's like, well, he's so meticulous about like the lighting and the way this all looks. And then you fast forward to the 80s and he's filming and he's like, it's on videotape. It doesn't matter. Just do it as many times as we need to. Like, who cares about the lighting? We're gonna shoot for 2 hours and then put it together in the edit. Like his passion and design as like a cinematographer is just completely sucked out by the shift to digital. And I really like that. I just think that's a really interesting, again, parallel of like those two experiences of a artist genuinely trying to like work on his craft versus like, I don't know, I'm holding a camera, just go. It doesn't matter. None of this matters. And I like that comparison as like a full encapsulation of the main conflict at the center of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like passion versus survival, kind of, or at least clinging to relevance, or
Totally.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, any other research tidbits from you, Max, or are we on to criteria?
Let's see if I had anything else. I think that was mainly it. Let's see. Yeah, just that PTA definitely feels very strongly about the art of 70s porn films. He feels it's an art form that could have gone on to become more widely accepted. Like that becomes very apparent when you watch him talk about the movie. And like he talks about how going to porn films in cinemas used to be kind of a date night thing. Like you could go and like do this hot thing, and then but it just kind of changed, and like the advent of video changed it and kind of ruined it. Like that's kind of his position as he's kind of like coming into this. And every word that I say, I can't not hear as innuendo, and that sentence especially was really funny. Anyway, just pointing that out. He's very interested in like the fakeness of sex. He talks about a cut scene that they had, which I think sounds really great, but he didn't include it. They didn't even shoot it. They rehearsed it, but they never shot it. Where Don Cheadle and I can't remember the actress or the character name who plays his wife, but when they decide to have sex at home, while they're having sex, like he starts to do kind of like a, oh, come on, baby. Yeah. And she's like, well, don't do that. This is real. And they have to kind of figure out how to have sex as real people. And I think that sounds like a very interesting scene that I would have liked to see in the film. Like that is such like also a part of this. It's just like, especially for Buck, like his story is like, how do you go from this to being like a person in like normal business, normal society? Like I think that's something that was really interesting and that I wanted to bring up, of just kind of PTA is very aware of like the fakeness of sex, especially in film, and how it works and how it looks, and he's like playing with that here, and I thought that was interesting.
I love that. That's really interesting. All right. Well, I think that moves us into our criteria then. So we have 3 criteria we look at, and we compare against Citizen Kane. And so we say, first of all, what is the like historical and technical relevance of the movie? The second one being how well is the movie doing what it's trying to do. And then third is the most subjective of just like how well are we connecting with it? You know, do we like this movie or not? So starting with historical and technical relevance, how do we feel about Boogie Nights compared to Kane?
I think it's better. I mean, but that's just me.
Right.
Okay, I'd love to hear your argument.
I mean, as someone who has seen Citizen Kane, I, well, I was looking up what other movies came out in 1997, and like, goddamn, it is a stacked year for like Good Will Hunting, Fifth Element, fuck, what else? Gattaca, I don't know. A lot of at least good movies, or like, oh, Titanic, Life is Beautiful.
Yeah, Titanic.
And I don't know, good movies, and also just like culturally important movie, or like, I don't know, things that really stuck around, like Austin Powers, like that was
Yeah.
But still Boogie Nights is something that people will like hold on to as one of the best films from that year. And I think just the fact that it can hold its own like that as something that PTA made at 26 is just insane. Yeah, as for Citizen Kane, I mean, it's a good technological achievement. But what else, really? I mean, I don't know.
What about you, Max?
Yeah, I mean, historical and technical relevance wise, I think that Citizen Kane gets that point out of the three criteria. I think Boogie Nights is great, and it gave us kind of like PTA, basically, in a way. Like, this kind of secured his career. Like, he went on to do Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, and then, like... But I think that I would be more willing to give, like, a historical relevance to later PTA films as just kind of being more... I don't know, not like, I think you're absolutely right, Tina, that this one still gets talked about, but I think that, like, even just things like Magnolia, like Punch Drunk Love, like There Will Be Blood, like that run is like so unbelievable that I feel like Citizen Kane's like influence and impact on cinematic history still deserves that recognition over this, is where I'm kind of at. But Parker, what do you think as far as historical and technical relevance?
I think I would land in the same boat as you, Max. Like, I fully hold space for the argument of Boogie Nights taking the point, because I do think, like, again, I was culturally aware of this movie without ever having seen it. I knew what it was about. I knew that I was aware that there was a very large prosthetic penis in this movie, right? Like, there were things about this that I was aware of, and also being aware of Paul Thomas Anderson, right, by extension, and looking at his greater body of work. But I do think, like, on a film by film basis, rather than like a career by career basis, I would probably still give this point to Citizen Kane, just because it's the granddaddy of film in so many ways, right? And that's the whole point of our show, is arguing whether it deserves that or not. But I think as far as like being a trailblazer of editing techniques and presenting narrative film in certain ways, I think I'll probably still give the point to Citizen Kane on that one.
However, there's still 2 more points.
There's still a lot of time here.
How well do you think this is doing what it's trying to do? I mean,
I think very well. But again, I'm very pro Boogie Nights, as you know, you've heard. I mean, you really care about all of the characters, even in a film that's about the porn industry. Like, it still manages to make every one of the characters emotionally relatable, you know, very sympathetic in their own way, you know, multifaceted. I think, you know, there's really no small parts in it. I think every character, no matter how big their role, like, they really have a lasting impact on the viewer. Like, Philip Seymour Hoffman is, you know, not a very pivotal character in the grand scheme of things, but he's still like, I mean, he's probably in like maybe 20 minutes of the whole thing, but that's one of the performances that people have like really clung to, for good reason.
yeah.
And I think even like technologically, I think, I don't know, it's just so well, like the switch to the 80s with the New Year's party, and like the switch in color grading, and the switch in music and I don't know, it just really does a good job of controlling your emotions or like, making you feel what the characters were feeling as they're in this point in their story. But yeah, again, I'm very, very pro Boogie Nights, but Citizen Kane
I
is
mean,
fine.
no, I mean, I am pro Boogie Nights as well. Don't paint me as anti Boogie Nights. I'm.
I don't know, Max. You were late.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
You were late showing up.
Wow, I really thought we weren't going to put that on the actual episode, but yes, everyone, I was 4 minutes late. But I will say that I am going to give this point to Boogie Nights. I think that this is a film, as far as what it's risking, this is a production that PTA was doing for his second film, first big film, really, that he was going to have complete control over. And the fact that he was like, I'm going to I'm going to convince New Line and Hollywood and all of these great actors to make a movie about porn actors with me. And the fact that the script works, the fact that like you're saying, Tina, like the music, the structure, the framing, like this is an incredibly well put together movie. And for it to be his second film, that 100% works at what it's trying to do. Because if his goal was to paint, porno people as real people and to explore a found family, a surrogate family dynamic, 100%, I think this absolutely works. I think it's very clear where he stands on this, on like the art of porn versus what it became and what it is. I think this is doing it really well. Is it doing a better job than what Citizen Kane is doing? I think so, but that's my opinion. And I'm going to stand by it because that's what we do on this show. That's what we're trying to do on this show now. We're trying to stand by our opinions. And that's where I'm at. I give the point to Boogie Nights. Parker.
Well, I mean, majority rules on this, but for what it's worth, I would also give it to Boogie Nights as well. I think I can't really put it any better than both of you have. I think it's just really landing so well with what it is trying to do. And if the theme of the movie is like, if the whole purpose of this movie is like wanting to portray these people as human beings and show family in an unexpected place, I think it nails that. I think it hits it out of the park in a huge, huge way. I think like the only thing that comes up for me for it as a possible against, and this has nothing to do with PTA, it has to do with like the industry as a whole, is the thing you and I have talked about, Max, a lot with Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I think about Amy Heckerling's quote all the time.
I forgot that this also came up for me. Tina, this is something that we learned when we watched Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which is a strong recommend if you haven't seen it.
Oh, I love it.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well,
Yay.
Amy Heckerling has this great quote because when she shot the film, she shot a scene between Stacy and Mike,
Mike,
Mike or Mark, one of the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The tall one. When those two have sex, she shot it so that you can see his dick, basically. And then when they put it in theaters, they cropped that out because they were like, that makes it X-rated. And she was like, well, then the man's not giving up anything. You know, the man is giving up nothing by,
a woman going topless is risking something. And a man going topless is risking nothing. And so if we're going to make this equitable, like, he needs to be risking something. And I just, ever since hearing that quote, I think about it anytime I see intimacy on film. Like, it's been rattling around in my brain for a year.
It's come up on this podcast a few times.
It has, and it will continue to, I think.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a really prescient point on her part, and it is only more applicable as time goes on. And so that's the only thing when I think about like what this movie is doing. And again, it has nothing to do with PTA, right? Like, this is all about the industry as a whole, and New Line saying it's going to be an NC-17 at 3 hours. You have to make it an R. That's what we agreed to. And like, just that there's a very like casualness to female nudity in this movie that isn't given to male nudity. Like, the final shot is the penis, right? Like, it's the build up.
I will say
climax.
this. I will say this, that I think everything with Dirk's penis in particular works for me because it feels like they're making a gag out of not showing it.
Sure.
Like, you have, the Colonel looking at it and going, thank you. And like, I think that they're doing enough with that. I do think that there is room for Reed to be fully nude, for, Buck to be full. Like, I think there's room for the other men to have shown something, to have given something to the film in that way. but I do think that, I don't know, for me, I think my only rebuttal against that, because I do agree, Parker, I think that men could have been a lot more naked in this, and I say that as a man who's like, I don't want to see it, but I'm like, if you're gonna show, like, I just think it's equal, and that quote has also rattled around my brain ever since I heard it. But I do think that my defense of that would be that the joke is that the last shot is the giant prosthetic penis.
Totally.
Like,
And like it doesn't take away from me giving the point. It was just something that I realized I hadn't mentioned during our wrap up that I wanted to talk about. So yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. That was in my head too.
Yeah. Point to Boogie Night.
Point to Boogie Nights. There was more than one. It was Boogie Nights. Yeah, I know.
No. Singular.
There was one Boogie Night.
There was one singular Boogie Night.
It all happened in one night.
It all happened. Yeah.
Yeah. This could have been a lot more impressive. It all happened in one night, you know?
Yeah.
Just speed run it.
Like a Magnolia kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Um,
But yeah, I mean, the last point is just emotionally connecting with it. And I think that this got much more, you know, I connect with this more than I connect with how Citizen Kane wants me to connect with it. It's taken me a few watches of Citizen Kane to like fully kind of understand what it wants me to feel and to feel that. And with Boogie Nights, I got it immediately. So point goes to Boogie Nights for me. Tina.
I mean, as someone who's seen Citizen Kane so many times, I think as much as it resonates with me emotionally, because I mean, Rosebud, it's just heartbreaking. Yeah, I'm gonna have to actually give this point to Boogie Nights.
What?
Wow.
You know, as much as I love Orson Welles and his wine drinking and his hatred of Woody Allen, I don't know, like this Boogie Nights feels like everything I want in a movie wrapped up into one. And I don't know, like as like a high schooler getting into it, I was like, oh yeah, it's like about porn. It's going to be a lot of sex and like, it's going to be funny and stuff. And then you start watching it and like, there's, you know, sex because that's just the subject matter, but it's so much more human and it's so much more complicated than that. And it really takes you through all the different emotions, which is my favorite thing about film, is that how much it can impact your feelings and change you, I guess. And especially the grittiness of the 80s, like it really sobers up the movie and it really takes away that charm of like, oh yeah, it's like this just fun, sexy 70s stuff. And then it's like, oh, this is real like human misery that we're watching here. And like the real downfall of these characters. And even though, you know, they pick themselves back up at the end, but it's just, I you know, I wrote a 7-page paper about it, you know, I could go on and on. I just love it so much. And I don't know, I think this, Magnolia, and Lana Del Rey's Ultraviolence album are possibly the best contributions that cocaine has made to our society. So yeah, I honestly, I think, good for PTA and his coke habit, and good for Fiona Apple for getting out of that relationship after Magnolia because of the coke, I think. But yeah, at least we got the movies out of it. And some good Fiona Apple songs, I'll say.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, I had to mention her. I had to.
Yeah, no, thank you.
If I'm going on a podcast to talk about anything related to Paul Thomas Anderson, I have to bring up Fiona Apple. It's in my contract. So.
Yeah, contractually obligated.
Yeah.
So yeah, my point goes to Boogie Nights.
Okay.
And Parker? Did you already say
Boogie Nights?
It? Okay, great.
No, just again. Yep. I let you two do all the talking and sound eloquent, and then I just come in and say, point.
Well, great.
I agree.
So by our criteria, Boogie Nights is better. Taking a step back. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Great.
I'm glad we can come to this conclusion.
Yeah,
no
I'm glad
pun intended, right?
Oh. Tina, do you want to have the honors of saying, you know, the words of, you know, film title is better than film title?
Yes. Film title is better. Yes, unequivocally, I think that's the word. Boogie Nights is better than Citizen Kane.
You heard it here first, folks.
We did it, everybody.
We did it. Another one for the records.
And no one can ever say otherwise because we said it. Tina, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. We were so happy to have you.
This was so fun. I should have prepared more instead of being all rambly and stuff. But this has been so much fun. I love talking about movies, and you are both lovely people. It's nice to talk to you just in general for an hour and a half. It was a good conversation.
Yeah, good talk.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We're so happy to have you.
For affirming my belief that Boogie Nights is better than Citizen Kane, because it's true.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Now we have
That's why we bring guests on. It's just so we can affirm them. But yeah, we'd love to have you on again sometime. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great.
Yeah.
Max, would you like to tee up what we're watching next time?
Yeah. Next time it's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Indeed it is.
Ooh.
It'll be very exciting, very fun.
Yeah, very fun.
Well, thank you as always, everyone, for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.